Hi everyone, this is Celine from Blue Calla Patterns and welcome to video 2 for the Stonecrop satchel. We're going to start this video by assembling our exterior gusset. So you're going to need your 2 exterior gusset pieces, your gusset firm interfacing, and your gusset foam interfacing. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to take your gusset exterior pieces and you're going to place them right sides together. And then you're going to, if I can find clips, you're going to clip them together along one of the shorter ends. And then I'm going to go over to the machine and I'm going to sew them together along this shorter end, and I'm going to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so they're sewn together. Now I'm going to open up the seam allowance and I'm going to top stitch the seam allowance along both sides of the seam. If you're using fabric, you can press the seam open and then top stitch it. Because I'm using cork and I can't press it, I'm just going to finger press as I sew. I'll just start along one side of the seam and then top stitch and then rotate and then go along the other side of the seam. Okay, so I've top stitched the seam allowance along both sides and hopefully you can see that. Now you're going to need some glue, and we're going to glue the firm interfacing to the wrong side of the gusset. Just gonna grab my glue. I'm just using Fabri-Tac to glue this in place. Now you want to make sure that this is centered, so that it's perfectly centered here along this middle seam. The piece here is exactly 8 inches, so I just made a mark at 4 inches top and bottom. Just going to apply a little bit of glue. Make sure you don't put too much glue because I don't want my cork to get soggy. Okay, and then using those center marks, just make sure it's lined up, and there should be 1/2 inch of space along the top and the bottom. Okay, so I'm going to put something heavy on this and I'm going to let it dry for a few minutes before we continue. Okay, so hopefully this is dried, and now I'm going to install purse feet. You don't have to install purse feet if you don't want to. It is optional, but I like the look of the purse feet on the bottom of the bag. So to make the marks for the location of our purse feet, you want to measure 3.5 inches from the center mark, and you want to go in towards the center 1.25 inches. I love these clear rulers for measuring. It makes it really easy to see what you're doing. Okay, so 3.5 inches in from the center and 1.25 inch from the outside edge here. Normally I wouldn't use this type of marker, but I want you to be able to see my marks on the video. Okay, turn it over and I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I always take my time making these marks because I'm really good at seeing if something is off just by looking at it, and it really bothers me if my purse feet are off a little bit. Okay, so now I'm just going to use a hole punch and I'm going to punch out the holes for the purse feet. Okay, I'm just going to turn this over. I should have maybe taken these out of the packaging ahead of time, but I did not. So I'm just going to stick these through, the other two as well. Okay, and just turn it over. And then I just open up the prongs a tiny bit, just so I can get the washer through them. Okay. Really, I should have taken these all out of the packaging, so I apologize for watching me do this boring task. Okay, so place the washers and spread the prongs. And I forgot to get it ready, but I'm going to actually put a bit of tape to cover these up, not to protect the lining, because I'm actually going to be putting foam interfacing, so I don't have to worry about that, but mostly just to make sure that the purse feet don't get torn out at some point, just to make them more secure. So I'm going to find my tape, and I'm going to place a piece of tape over the prongs. Okay, so I've put a bit of tape over the prongs of the purse feet, and now I'm going to place my gusset over my foam interfacing, and I'm just going to clip this in place. Now, if you have a machine that does a zigzag stitch, I would really recommend that you use a zigzag stitch to baste the foam to the wrong side of your gusset, only because it will help to compress the edges and make the seams less bulky. This bag can get a little bit bulky along the top corners because of the foam. So I'm just going to flip this over so you can have a look. Now, another thing that you can do to reduce bulk in the corners is to just cut a little triangle out of the foam along these corners. And when you'll see when you're attaching the gusset to the front and the back exterior panels, you're going to appreciate it. It's going to be a lot less bulky and easier to sew. Now, my machine is actually pretty good with sewing thick layers, so I don't really need to do this, but for those of you who are using the domestic, you might want to give this a try. So I'm going to go ahead and baste the foam to the gusset. I do have a zigzag machine, but I do not want to pull it out. So I'm actually just going to use a basting stitch, a straight stitch, to attach this. But if you have a domestic machine, you're worried about sewing thick layers, then you might want to consider using a zigzag stitch to baste this in place. Okay, so here our gusset is ready. I'm going to set it aside, and if you're following the pattern, you'll see that the next step is the organizer pocket assembly. This is a really long section in the pattern, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to skip to assembling the exterior back panel instead, because I want the organizer pocket to be a video on its own. So what we're going to do is we're going to skip ahead, and I'm going to find the page so that you can follow. So it's page 10 and it's step 45. So we're actually going to skip ahead to that part. I'm going to just pause for a minute. I'm going to gather all of the different pieces that we need to do this assembly, and then we'll get started. Okay, so to assemble the exterior back panel of the bag, these are the pieces that you're going to need. You're going to need one of your exterior top band pieces, one of your bottom band pieces. You're going to need your exterior zipper pocket panel. I'm gonna set that aside. And you're going to need your exterior zipper facing piece, and keep the pattern piece itself handy because we're going to need it. And then you're going to need your 2 exterior zipper pocket lining pieces. So what we're going to start by doing is taking the pattern piece, and we're going to actually cut out this piece because we're going to use it as a guide to draw the zipper pocket opening on the wrong side of our facing piece. Okay, so I'm just going to place this like this, and then I'm going to draw out this shape. Oh, I forgot to mention that we also need our zipper. I'll get that in a minute. I'm trying to draw this with a pen that will show up so you can see on the video the actual pen marks. Okay. Now, I did include a placement guide for the opening, but really, if you just center it, it's pretty much the same thing. So you don't really have to worry about that too much. Then I'm going to pin this in place. Okay, now make sure that it's lined up along the top edge here. Bent pin. I did not get any pins ready ahead of time. Okay. So I'm going to go over to my machine, and I'm just going to sew along the line that I drew. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. And then we'll come and we'll do a little bit of cutting here before we press it to the wrong side. I've sewn along the line that I drew, and now I'm just going to trim a little bit away from both layers, so the facing and the exterior panel. I'm going to just trim away till there's about maybe 1/4 inch left. Okay. And then we need to clip into the corners without cutting the stitching, so that when we're pressing to the wrong side, the corners are nice and rounded. So I'm just clipping into the seam allowance, but make sure you don't cut any of those stitching, the stitching here in the corners. Okay, I don't know if you can see, there you go. Okay, so now I'm going to just set up my iron, and we're going to press the facing to the wrong side. Next, what we're going to do is we're going to flip the facing piece to the wrong side, and we're going to press the seam along the entire edge. And you'll want to go really slowly in this step because you want the curved corners to look really nice. So I kind of dampen my fingers, and I just roll the seam between my fingers, and then I press. And I do small sections at a time because if you press and then your seam isn't really perfect, I find it really hard to get it right afterwards. So it's just better to do it right the first time. Okay, so I do it first from the right side, and then I'll do it a second time from the wrong side. Okay, so that part is done. Just going to put it here for now. Then you're going to need your zipper pocket lining pieces. So I'm just going to start with one piece. And I did find my zipper. So you're going to, so if you're using a pre-made zipper, this is going to look different. I'm using zipper tape. So I have a 12-inch piece of zipper tape, and my zipper pocket lining piece is also 12 inches. So I know that it's going to fit perfectly along the top edge. If you're using a pre-made zipper, it's going to look slightly different, and that's okay. Just make sure that you're centering it along the top before you pin it in place. Okay, so I'm going to go over to my machine, and I'm going to sew the zipper to the lining piece along the top edge with 1/4 inch seam allowance, and make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. So the zipper's attached here. I'm just going to press the lining piece away from the zipper. So you'll see my zipper now is wrong side up and my lining piece is right side up. So wondering why my iron wasn't steaming is because I'd actually turned the steam off. Okay, so now I'm going to take the last zipper pocket lining piece, place this on top, and I'm just repeating exactly the same steps again. Okay, so sew the zipper to the remaining zipper pocket lining piece, same seam allowance. The second piece is attached, and I'm just going to do exactly the same thing. And I'm just going to press this lining piece away from my zipper. So the two lining pieces are right side facing up, and my zipper is wrong side facing up. And then we have the opposite on this side. Okay, so now you're going to keep them open like this, and you're going to place this over top and just flip this over so that you can see your facing piece. And you want the facing piece to be lined up with the edges of your zipper pocket lining pieces. Okay, and you want the top edges here to be aligned with the top edge of the zipper. And then I'm just going to pin this in place. It's very hard to pin on a mat that you don't want to include. Okay, so now I'm going to go over to my machine, and you leave this piece facing up and you start sewing here. You want to use a 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and you're sewing through the exterior pieces here, your zipper, and you're also going to catch a bit of your bottom lining piece, and you're going to sew all along the curved edge here. Move your zipper pull out of the way, and I try to make sure that the spacing here between the zipper and this edge remains consistent so that your zipper looks nice and straight in the opening. And then once I've sewn the curve, I also just do a quick basting stitch here along the top edge through the pocket lining piece, because then later when we flip it over, it sort of keeps it out of the zipper. It doesn't get caught in the zipper. Okay, so I'm going to go over to the machine and I'll just sew here with 1/8 of an inch seam allowance, and then quickly baste just here. Try to stay about 1/8 of an inch from the top edge of the zipper. Okay, so the zipper is sewn into place. Now we're just going to flip this over, and you're going to take this piece and you're going to flip it down. Now it's not going to meet at the bottom here. That's okay. We don't really want it to go all the way down because then it would get caught on the seam allowance, and we don't want that. So just flip it down this way until it's flat. I usually press a little bit here. Okay, and then you're going to clip the bottom edge together, but don't include the exterior piece. You just want the two lining pieces together. Okay, now we can do this in 2 steps or 1 step. To make it simpler, we're going to do it in 2 steps. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to sew them along the bottom edge together here. And you're following this edge, obviously not this edge, because otherwise you will not be sewing them together properly. So I'm going to start by just sewing the 2 of them together here. And you can sew about 3/8 of an inch is fine from the bottom edge of this piece here at the front. Make sure you're not sewing this piece at all. You're just sewing these 2 lining pieces together. Okay, so the bottom edges are sewn, and I'm just going to trim the excess here. And now we need to close up the sides. So I turn it over this way, and I just flip the exterior piece so it's out of the way, because we're not going to sew it in this step. And you're going to try to get as close as you can to the stitching here along the curve of the zipper pocket opening. And you're just going to work your way and sew down. Make sure that you backstitch at the beginning and the end. And then you're going to flip this part over, and you're going to do the same thing on this side. Okay, so the 2 sides are sewn together, and we're just going to trim. Okay, and our zipper pocket's done. I'm just going to give it a quick little press. Okay. All right, so we're not going to need this, so I'm just going to put this aside, and then I'll grab the top and bottom band pieces that we need to attach next. Okay, so now I have my top band and my bottom band exterior pieces, and we're going to attach the bottom piece to the bottom edge and the top piece to the top edge. Now remember when I said to draw the arrow to show which direction is the top for this piece, because it does have a slight angle, and this is slightly narrower than this end. That's where this is going to come in handy now. So this is my top edge. I want to attach the bottom edge to the top edge here. Now you're going to probably need to move your zipper pull back and forth so that it's not in the way while you're sewing this step. Okay, so I'm just going to clip this piece here. Now, if you used the right type of zipper, you use the a 4.5 or number 5, you should be able to sew along this top edge with 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and there should be enough room. Okay, so I'm going to go over and sew this piece together, and I'm going to make sure to backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so this is sewn now to the top edge, and I do need to top stitch it, but I'm actually going to wait to do that because I'm going to switch to a heavier weight thread to do this top stitching so it looks nicer. So I'll leave that for now. If you're using the same weight thread, you can actually just go ahead and top stitch this, and you want to top stitch it here along the bottom. So your seam allowance is actually pressed towards the top. So if you're using cork, you can't press, so you need to finger press and top stitch, which is what I'll be doing next. So what I'm just going to do before I do my top stitching is attach this, and you're attaching the straight edge, obviously, to the bottom edge of this exterior panel. Okay, and it's the same thing, 3/8 of an inch seam allowance, and make sure you backstitch at the beginning and the end. Okay, so top and bottom bands are sewn on, and I'm just going to go ahead and top stitch them. So you want this seam allowance pointing upwards, this seam allowance pointing downwards, and you're top stitching with 1/8 seam allowance along the top and the bottom band. Okay, so I've top stitched here along my bottom and top bands, and I'm going to take one of my main body foam interfacing pieces. Now make sure that you see those center marks on the wrong side, and place your assembled panel on the other side. So I want to see those center marks on the wrong side. Now I made a mistake and I did not use a big enough seam allowance here. So now my foam piece is a little bit smaller. That is not a big deal. Just goes to show you that I make mistakes all the time. So just clip this on to the wrong side. And if you're a little bit off like I am, it's no big deal. Just sort of center the panel on top of the foam piece, okay? Now, again, I want to reduce bulk, so I'm going to clip these corners off. And then you have, again, the two options. You can base stitch this on with a straight stitch, or you can use a zigzag stitch, which will compress the foam along the edges, and it'll make it less bulky when you're doing assembly later on. So it's up to you what you prefer. Okay, I'm just going to use a straight stitch to base this on. So I'm going to go ahead and do that now. Okay, so the foam panel is basted on, and I now have a zipper pocket. Okay, and that is it for this video. In the next video, we're going to tackle that organizer pocket. So it might be a little bit of a longer video, and then we'll finish the exterior assembly in the following video, so probably video 4.